Yeah, we're just about to start, and I would encourage those of you who are sitting kind of back. This is a gigantic room to have what's obviously going to be an intimate gathering. So I'd encourage you to come on up a little closer if you would, and so we can kind of all be together. Maybe you could meet somebody new and not be all spread out around the room, if you'd like.
Don't be scared of that bag, it's mine.
Yeah. No big pressure, but it'd be kind of, presenters would, can look at you all at once if you're a little closer.
Look, somebody's taking your suggestion, Wes. That's great.
Even Dr. Thompson's taking my suggestion here. So.
See, can we move you over here? Yeah, now we can actually sort of be next to each other. I moved you to the other side of the screen, Danielle.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Yeah.
All right, so why don't we get started on this panel this afternoon. Thanks everyone for being here, presenters and others coming to listen to how the arts can be integrated into our work for environmental justice and sustainability. We have one speaker here who's got a partner on Skype, and then we have a couple speakers after that, and then a couple more after that, and then one. So each of the speakers' teams gets 15 minutes total, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions in there. And the people who've been teams have asked that we let each of the pairs, or I thought they aren't triplets, each of the pairs do both their parts first, and then we'll have some time for questions after. So our first pair here is Kelly Murdoch-Kitt, who's next to me, and Danielle Emmons.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hi, Danielle, who's there.
Yes.
And I guess Kelly will tell you something about Danielle. So Kelly is assistant professor in the graphic design program at Rochester Institute of Technology's College of Imaging Arts and Sciences. She teaches and works primarily in the areas of interaction and user experience design. Kelly's graduate research explores theories of situated learning and experiential elements of virtual communities and their impact on public interest issues, which inform her current teaching and scholarship. Her interest in design pedagogy informs recent collaborations exploring the sociocultural benefits of technologically mediated cross-cultural design education. It's a mouthful, huh?
That's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and the advantages of teaching visual literacy concepts to students outside of design disciplines and the benefits of integrating sustainability challenges into project-based design courses. So I invite you to welcome Kelly Murdoch-Kitt. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. So today we are talking about virtually mediated cross-cultural design communication and what the heck that means. And I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Danielle Emmons. There you see her up there. She is typically located in Doha, Qatar, where she teaches at Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar. And she is currently visiting us live from North Carolina. She could not make it all the way to this side of the country, but she is currently in the United States, so at least there is a somewhat bearable time difference, which is not our typical, not what we typically face when we work together. So Danielle and I are going to talk to you today about why we feel it's very important for us to be exposing students not only to sustainability challenges within project-based design curricula, but also to introduce this cross-cultural and intercultural collaborative element as well. Danielle, do you want to?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I think, Kelly, you introduced me wonderfully. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah?
You're loud and clear.
Okay. Just want to make sure, because Kelly and I are going to try and go back and forth a little bit and explain our different classes. So we want to make sure you can hear me as well. So our informal pedagogic study really looked at the outcomes of a collaboration between students in North America, in New York in particular, and the Arabian Gulf region, in Qatar in specific, to help improve water conservation practices at both the individual and the community levels. And so for us, when some of the major challenges that we were looking at with water and water scarcity could span the spectrum from the idea that oil and gas wells affect water supply to the notion that the greatest challenges lie within the actual availability of water itself, a huge issue for those of us in these more arid desert environments. But both regions and really everywhere in the world, even with the recent news across the Gulf Lakes, it seems that everybody is really needing to pay attention to the importance of water. And we see this also in the Middle East and in the North Africa, and where the region really may face drastic water shortages very soon in relation to climate change, to population growth, and even the fast economic development of the Gulf in particular.
So, contrary to that, I am teaching in the Great Lakes region, which of the Earth's 2% fresh surface water, about a fifth of it is located in this area. So, we're dealing with what seems like a lot of this resource, and 84% of the water in North America is in the Great Lakes. So the issue with us, though, even though it seems like we have water in abundance, is water quality. So it's really a sensitive resource. The outflows from the Great Lakes are comparatively small. So you get this huge volume of water, but it's not really going anywhere. So, you know, a lot of you have probably heard the old adage, the solution to pollution is dilution. And that's been going on for a very long time in the Great Lakes. And it's absolutely untrue because these pollutants gather and accumulate and actually create really difficult crises within the climate that are very hard to resolve. So I don't know if you guys have followed the news of what's been happening in Lake Erie with the water quality in the city of Toledo, but that's a recent example of how this resource has been affected by pollution and contaminants. So we're looking at how design could actually play a positive role in framing these issues, water scarcity, water quality, and we thought that this would be a great topic to introduce to two groups of students coming from very different points of this problem. So we've got Daniil's students working in Doha, Qatar, my students working in Rochester, New York, and we thought, you know, we'll bring them together so that they can see vastly different perspectives and put their heads together in terms of different ways to approach this problem.
And for us, really working together on a global issue such as water sustainability really gave our participants a common goal that brought the classes together and helped them transcend some of these barriers that might be based on culture, distance, and even time. And so with water sustainability as this common thread, both courses tried to prioritize teamwork, engagement with the local and global communities, and this idea of contributing to environmental stewardship through the application of design thinking in a cross-cultural setting.
So when we first kicked this off, we initially introduced the students to each other through a Skype meeting and had them kick off some research. The semesters were not exactly in parallel with each other, so Daniil's students got an opportunity to kind of start the research before we actually introduced them. But when we put them together, we paired them up based on their interests in subtopics under this much broader umbrella of water sustainability. So they came together through common interests in subject matter. So we were talking about some of the issues I've already mentioned, such as scarcity and pollution, but also looking at equity, privatization, all kinds of different topics under this umbrella of water sustainability. So to start this off, we thought it would be fun to have something that was a really low stakes collaboration. So the students each made a little avatar to represent themselves, and this is significant culturally because Daniil's students weren't really comfortable representing themselves photographically to my class. So they created little avatars of themselves, and my students followed suit, and then they worked together as a team to combine these images into the team avatars that you see at the far right of the screen. And this was a nice way to have sort of a low-stakes, neutral way to come together before they got into kind of the hard work of dealing with this water sustainability topic. From there, the students did what we called the day in the life with water little study with themselves. So they tracked their day-to-day touch points, or what they thought their touch points were with water. So we could kind of break that down a little bit more in class. And these were things that they were also sharing with their partners. So while a lot of these images are not necessarily like beautiful or particularly artistic, they really gave the students insight into each other's day-to-day lives. You're seeing shots of people's kitchens and bathrooms, and this is not really typical of most cross-cultural exchanges. So it broke down barriers pretty quickly and got the students really talking about what their lives are actually like. It worked as a really good icebreaker.
Yeah, absolutely. So then We followed this with something called a team intervention remix. And this activity allowed teams to work on a quick design experiment together, really working towards building camaraderie as they tried to envision together how they might affect behavior shifts towards the limited water resources that they might have in each region. So students began by working individually on their shared topics, then sharing the files with their collaborating partner, and then kind of getting those files back and putting the finishing touches on this kind of experiment. So really trying to build that idea of teamwork and that we can have a better grasp on solving these problems together than separately. And then, so following their exchange of imagery, students continued to develop an understanding of international perspectives by sharing research about the facet of the water crisis that they were looking at using virtual technologies like Kelly mentioned, such as Google+. So for instance, what we mean by something like this is bottled water may be kind of a passé topic in the US, where we kind of all know we should be, taking our own water bottles with us and filling them up. But in Qatar, the main source of fresh drinking water is bottled water in various sizes, but that's really what you're going to get at a restaurant. That's what you're going to have at home. And so the students are learning to understand what it's like to live in each different country, and then exposing each other to concepts of like, well, how does our country maybe deal with this? So my students then, they are working in an exhibition environment, and so they developed a kids installation for children so that they could understand the real value of recycling or turning water bottles into puppets. And so you can see sort of images from that installation here. And this as a way to raise awareness about the importance of doing something with all these water bottles that are, throughout Qatar.
So my students were initially completely scandalized by this idea that this, entire culture was completely reliant on bottled water. They were like, oh my God, this is terrible. And I think Daniil's students were equally surprised that my students were then inspired to promote tap water, which is not a condoned drinking resource in Doha. So my students who were partnered with the students that worked on the bottled water project were looking at creating an online art contest to promote drinking tap water. So their campaign is called Go Tap, and it's this social art contest where people upload images that they've created that extol the benefits of drinking tap water and try to create some social reinforcement and fun around the practice. So this particular topic really opened up an interesting cultural resource-based and ideological exchange between our two classes.
Absolutely. So another example of maybe international perspectives informing partners about issues unique to their region would be desalination. This in Qatar is used for your kind of regular running water in the house. So for showers, watering the lawn, washing your car. Desalination is the way that the community has access to those kinds of water. So in response, this group of students designed an installation that projected a video based animation onto these three-dimensional wooden panels that describe the desalination process and illustrate the complexity of it and its environmental impacts.
One of my students in the Rochester class was in a group with Daniil's students who were looking at this idea of personal habits and different places where you might be able to intervene with people's day-to-day routines or how they really conceive of their water use patterns. So that day in the life exercise where they were looking at all the tangible touch points with water actually led the student to explore water that's invested in things that you don't typically see. So he was looking at how you could maybe have an intervention at a public transit hub or an iPad app that acts sort of like a little quiz where people can input things about what they're eating for dinner or what they're what they're wearing and learn about how much water is actually invested in those products. So he was really interested in this concept of hidden water, and that arose from both the exercises that we did early on as well as his exchange with his cross-cultural partners in Daniil's class. So as far as teaching design is concerned, one of the really important elements for us, both in the teaching and learning process, is critique. And Daniil and I have done these types of exchanges a few times, and we've experimented with different tools every time. We're constantly refining the process. And so Daniil mentioned Google Plus earlier, and we created a Google Plus classroom that we used exclusively for our classes. So anything the students posted was able to be seen publicly between the two classes, but it was closed off to any outsiders. And this created a great environment for critique and exchange. So the students actually initiated a lot of discussion within this particular environment, and it was a lot more successful than any previous methods that we had used to try to get them to talk about their works in progress. And this all sort of culminated with us each virtually visiting each other's classrooms, and the students made presentations to us. So we were able to follow the process and the evolution of the projects through Google Plus across both classrooms, and then the students gave us these sort of semi-formal presentations where we could give them, pretty informed feedback because we'd watched the whole evolution of the project.
And so the final outcome of this pedagogic research was a series of public exhibitions of student design projects in both Doha and in Rochester. And this was their way to share the outcomes of the design work with both the local and global community. So the Doha class, my class, gave the inaugural exhibit the name My, which is an English-Arabic play on the word my water. My being water in Arabic. So each installation really centered on one of these different water-related themes that they'd been working on throughout the semester, and really tried to encourage the visitors to shift their own habits towards water consumption practices to maybe more conservative ones.
And my class also, inspired by Daniil's class, my class was actually an interaction design class, so an exhibit wasn't initially an idea that even crossed their minds as a possibility, but we have this big campus-wide creativity and innovation festival at the end of the spring semester. So they really got inspired by working with Daniil's students, and they decided they wanted to launch their own exhibition to share both the prototypes that they had been designing as well as some of the work from Daniil's students and more hands-on and experiential aspects. So the installation that they're all diving into in this bottom corner here, the inside drop is kind of showing how much water you would use with a low-flow shower head in a 5-minute shower. And the orange border, the full sum of that is what a normal shower head would use. They did all the math and they used all the food dye. So we've also been really interested in tracking what the benefits and challenges are for our students. What are they actually getting out of this? So we've given them a series of surveys, checkpoints throughout the semester, and asked them some questions to help us kind of ascertain how this is working with them. It's been interesting for us to see that the students' perceived knowledge of global sustainability challenges has really improved over the duration of the semester, so those 16 weeks that they've been working together. And something else that we thought was really great, these are just 2 of the points we measured, we had a much larger scale, but that they thought that the collaboration skills were very useful. So between the RIT class and the VCU-Q class, both classes rated those skills as something that they found extremely valuable. So it's the culmination of not only the things that we have to teach within the context of a particular design course and the course objectives handed down by the powers that be, but bringing in these really otherwise intangible benefits and these social and interpersonal and even emotional skills that the students are building, I think, are really valuable.
Yeah, and so just as we wrap up, we thought we might talk about just a little bit of advice for those who might be interested in some of these kinds of collaborations. And what we really saw was that many of the most successful projects came from students who learned early on how to respect and trust each other. And this, for us, made those introductory activities very essential to the process. So not to just throw them in cold, but allow that kind of relationship to build so that they can also learn to trust each other in a classroom space, but also trust their design files with one another. And that atmosphere of acceptance in the classroom about differences and ambiguity being very important. I think another thing is this belief that each of them have a stake in the success of their partner overseas, and that tying into sustainability being a wonderful way to build these skills. And at the same time, we really do realize that this is a challenge. There is a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty in the process. They need to learn to manage time difference and even cultural differences, sometimes language challenges, and even not knowing what those other students are going to do with their design files. But for us, we really believe all of these experiences, challenges, and benefits better prepare students for a 21st century working environment.
So it's easy for Daniil and I to stand up here and tell you about this with these these images that we've curated and planned, but to be completely honest, it is like a three-ring circus during the semester, trying to coordinate all of these things across this great distance. And it's a lot of work, but we think it's really worthwhile, for all the different things that we've described, all the different reasons. But really, it's also about trying to forge these international partnerships early on and planting the seed with our students that they really do need to learn how to work together. And it's not just working together within the same classroom, but it's working together to transcend cultural differences and borders and time and these problems that we're all facing globally. So, we're doing this to help build their skills as practitioners, but we're also trying to create, change agents for the next generation. So thank you very much for taking the time to attend our session today. This is our contact info if you'd like to reach out. And I guess we'll take some questions. Yeah?
Just a little bit of
Okay.
time, but yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're running just a little bit behind here, so I don't want to take too much time so everybody has a chance to present. But if there's anybody who has a question, I'll be glad to bring the mic around so you can all hear. Questions for Kelly or for Daniil and their project?
So I was just curious if both classes had the same syllabus and if all of the content of each course was the same or if it was just this single project that was shared.
Daniil, did you hear the question?
I think so. And no, we still each had our own syllabi. We each had our own learning objectives for the design course. And so the subject matter that the designers were able to focus on and still meet those learning objectives of the design curriculum, I think we both felt like we were able to achieve those things.
So yeah, Daniil's class was planned to be an exhibit design class. My class is an interactive design class, but there's so many different common threads, and we were able to sort of capitalize on the similarities while still acknowledging the unique aspects of the two classes. But the students worked together for the duration of their semester, so everything that they did was basically in exchange and communication and collaboration with each other. So they were fulfilling different goals within the classes, but they were always exchanging and kind of working toward common goals together. Yeah.
So I want to honor everybody's opportunity to speak. So thank you again to Kelly and Daniil, and we'll move on to our next ones. If for some reason we have more time at the end, maybe we can come back for further questions. So
Thank you.
So while Kelly's putting that away, I want to introduce BJ Cummings and Sarah Cabbage, who are our next presenters. And they're presenting on the Duwamish River, which is close to my own heart. Not everybody in Seattle recognizes the Duwamish River. It's not even called that anymore, right? It's called a waterway. It doesn't rise to the dignity of being a river. They call it a river, so they'll tell you about that, I'm sure. BJ Cummings is policy advisor for the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition and Technical Advisory Group in Seattle and has served as the organization's community health projects manager and coordinator. She has also worked for environmental and community organizations on CERCLA and Clean Water Act issues in Puget Sound since 1994. She served as the Soundkeeper for Puget Soundkeeper Alliance and also as the founding director for the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition. She's also founder and principal of Community Environmental Services, Inc., providing policy and environmental health consulting services to community-based and nonprofit clients in the Pacific Northwest. She holds a master's degree in environmental geography from UCLA, who had their own water problem recently, huh? And is the author and producer of numerous articles, books, and documentary films on environmental and development issues locally and throughout North, Central, and South America. Sarah Cabbage is an artist and urban planner with a master's in urban planning from University of Washington and over a decade of professional urban planning experience. Her artistic practice uses large scales and ephemeral materials to address ethical, environmental, and social issues. Building an island on a barge in the Duwamish River or distributing 20 tons of flour to the people of Chicago is an examination of the commodity food system. She frequently applies methods of inquiry from planning and social science domains, public engagement and community organizing techniques, and methods to collect, synthesize, and visualize information. She's developed site-specific public art installations for the City of Seattle, King County, City of Redmond, Bellevue, Kent, Duval, and the Long Walk. Maybe you can tell us what that is. And the Olympic Sculpture Park and Smoke Farms Lo-Fi Festival. So welcome, BJ and Sarah.
We don't need it.
Well, I guess that's better, huh? Because, the art world is a pretty jargony world, and even just, even just using the word art is, it's sort of a loaded term. And, so what we are talking about today is, in essence, art that is deliberately tackling any issue of social, political, or environmental relevance, and that is also in a publicly visible way. And then on the flip side, talking about creative strategies for public engagement and empowerment. And you'll see that BJ and I sort of come at this from two different angles. I am the artist who is looking at these environmental and social issues. She is the community organizer who is using art to sort of further a specific end. So these four terms, what it's called at the bottom, are those are the terms kind of bandied around in the art world. Socially engaged artwork is really a popular theme these days. Social practice artwork, public practice, new genre public art, creative placemaking. All of these terms, they overlap a lot. There's some distinction between them, but when you get to talking about artists about this type of artwork, this is what you'll hear, so just a warning. And then some of the methods that people use, because really this type of artwork draws upon a lot of disciplines, and a lot of it may not really even look like what we think of as art at all. But artists are drawing on lots of scientific research, sociology, anthropology, social work, community organizing, public involvement techniques, urban planning, and all of those methods sort of come into play to help people, help involve the public in the project, inform the public, and this whole theme of public participation is really common. So these are all basically different ways to engage different participants and collaborators in the project. People can be involved in these projects from sort of a variety of angles, from this sort of basic predefined participatory role that is sort of, conceptualized by the artist to more fully collaborative and substantive roles. The use of ephemeral materials or kind of time-based artwork is another common strategy. It sort of is a way to kind of build some excitement around whatever you're doing because it's only going to be there for a short amount of time, so it's kind of a good way to generate energy. Another term you'll hear is site-specific artwork, so that's something that is responding to a specific place, time, set of conditions in a very specific or artistic way. And so this is a pretty simple diagram, but I just wanted to make the point that there's two foundational goals when you're talking about socially engaged art. You know, one is sort of this advocacy angle, the other is more sort of conceptual or artistic. And, you know, I'm sort of presenting these along a continuum. I don't know that I really believe that one precludes the other and they're, you know, both totally valid and okay. But it's really important to think about how these goals interact and how you can use these sort of different strategies to foster, you know, to accomplish whatever you want to accomplish. And I guess I'll give an example. So projects where artistic goals are kind of primary may have a more ambiguous message or no overt message at all compared to projects where, you know, you're trying to get somebody to do something for the purpose of advocacy and you're using a creative means to do that, and that's a pretty direct action and to the point. And so this idea of kind of direct creative advocacy is a great way, and BJ will tell you all about this, it's a great way to sort of get people that are already sort of interested or might be interested really excited and re-engaged and re-energized and generate some energy around the concept. Where something that's a little more ambiguous and artistic, or you know, maybe just purely visual sort of can have an advantage is in the case where you're trying to sort of reach beyond the choir and reach audiences that might be opposed traditionally to your point of view. And that's one of the things that art really excels at, is sort of opening people's minds or kind of softening those boundaries. And that's sort of how we've used it in our projects in the Duwamish. But first I'm going to turn it over to BJ, and she's going to talk a little bit about the DRCC's work, and I guess just give you some context about what's going on there.
I think, is our IT guy still missing? Okay, he is not coming back. Okay. Okay, so I wanted first to just lay a little bit of context. What's our advancer? Just the buttons here? Got it. So Duwamish River here in Seattle. I'm sure there's some folks here from out of town, but how many of you are Seattle area people? Okay, and how many of you have actually been to and visited the Duwamish River? About half of the Seattle area people. That's pretty good. When the Duwamish River was first listed for cleanup in 2001, that's when it was placed on EPA's National Priorities List, or the Superfund list, designating it as one of the most toxic hazardous waste sites in the country. When that happened, which also requires the river to be cleaned up, about, I would estimate, maybe 10% of people living in the city of Seattle even knew we had a river. What you just saw is about typical now. I think we might be up to 50%, but that means we still have about half of the residents of the city of Seattle who aren't even aware that we have a river here, let alone where it is or have actually been down to visit it. In the communities that live directly around the river, South Seattle communities, closest ones are South Park and Georgetown, but the whole Duwamish Valley also includes areas like White Center and Pigeon Point and some of those other neighborhoods that, again, many people in Seattle haven't taken the time to visit. We have a very, very wide diversity of languages and cultures. Over 20 languages are spoken in the Duwamish Valley. We also have a very large immigrant population from all over. Mexico, certainly, throughout Latin America, Asian and Pacific Islander country immigrants, East African, really a very wide variety. While this creates a really terrific kind of cultural fabric, it also presents a lot of challenges for getting people involved, not just in the river cleanup and what it means for their immediate environment and for their own and their family's health, but really for all of the challenges that folks in the neighborhoods around there and people who use the river in other ways face. In addition to the residents and the diversity there and the various languages that are spoken and the challenges to communication and education and public involvement, we also have a whole different set of folks from throughout the King County, Seattle metropolitan area who fish in the river. We have 3 different tribes who use the river and have historically for cultural and subsistence purposes. We have the city's largest industrial core and all of the businesses who use the river and the workers at those businesses who have their own way of interacting separate from the business owners themselves. So the challenges and the diversity are kind of equally matched. What we have, the challenge that we have is 42 chemicals exceeding environmental and human health standards in the river bottom, and the need to design a cleanup that's going to, as best as possible, protect the health of all of those different constituencies. And how to do that in a way that empowers everybody who's affected to be part of the process and part of the solution. And that's a lot of the work that Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition does. We're EPA's community advisory group for the cleanup site, and it's our job to make sure that the community, all of the communities affected, are involved in the decisions that need to be made. So we have, as I mentioned, a huge challenge. The river in 2001, before any of this began, was not a pleasant place to be. People who lived near the river felt that not just their river, but their communities were neglected because of the state that the river had been allowed to degenerate into. Over the last about 10 years now, there have been several early action or hotspot cleanups while EPA is designing the river-wide cleanup. And there's also been a lot of work done really over the last 2 decades on starting to restore some habitat areas along the river. So we're going from 10, 20 years ago, a sense of despair about the state of the river to today, I would say, a sense of hope for the future. EPA's river-wide cleanup plan is due out by the end of this year, and we've now had almost 15 years of really intense public involvement in helping to shape and advise and guide what that cleanup is going to look like. So how do you do that in a community as diverse, with as many different languages and with as many different cultural backgrounds and as many different as well as shared values in order to get to that point? And that's why from the very beginning we have been using art as kind of a cross-cultural, cross-lingual mechanism for really deep community engagement. Really making sure that there's something for everybody to come to the table and get involved in this effort. Whoops, getting ahead of myself. So I just want to highlight a couple of the most important reasons, or kind of the most significant reasons why we started using art for effective community engagement in environmental justice communities. One is just really practical. People have very, very, very limited leisure and family time. These are very low-income neighborhoods. And asking people to do something in their free time, during their family time, really requires that you respect that time and make it something that the entire family can participate in, and that brings something of value in the very immediate term, not just in the long term. So making those opportunities something that is enriching rather than taxing on the community is what we set out to do from the beginning. And the arts played a very big role in that. Also working across those cultural and language barriers, we found, again, just from a very practical perspective, that using the arts was a really effective way of starting to cross some of those barriers. One of the things that we didn't really know when we started, but that we've learned through the process, is that in addition to those really practical reasons for starting to use the arts to engage the community, what we found is that it really went much deeper than that and allowed people to really start to express and communicate about their shared values through artistic expression, through artistic interpretation. And I wouldn't say that that's a practical reason for getting involved in it, but it's one of the things that we found actually made the results even greater than the intention going into this, if that makes sense. I just want to give you a couple of examples because I really want to talk about some of the next things that are coming up that Sarah's going to discuss. But a couple of examples are something as simple, or kind of superficial, if you will, about using art displays at community meetings, or having a art contest for young children going parallel to perhaps an EPA community presentation, and then doing a shared award ceremony at the end. As you get deeper and other opportunities evolve, we've also been seeing things like having groups of artists actually do residencies along the river where they'll spend 10 days or maybe even 14 days every single day down at the river, creating different creating different works of art, which we will then turn around and exhibit at the next community meeting, for example. That's going on right now, actually. We're halfway through the 3rd year of a Duwamish residency for artists on the river this week. We've had very interactive opportunities, whether it's building river cleanup plans out of Legos, or actually creating 3D models of the river for people to really interact with. And then more kind of public education and communications opportunities as well. And I'm just going to show you a couple of really quick examples. Allowing people to comment using art rather than just using words is something that we did during the public comment period on the final cleanup plan last year. And these were accepted by EPA as formal public comment on their cleanup plan. Reaching into the performing arts as well as the visual arts. This has actually, I would say, been even more effective. I must have an automatic timer thing going on. Even more effective in really crossing those cultural boundaries, because we can draw from performing arts traditions and styles of all of the cultures in the Duwamish Valley, and then bring those back out to the community in tandem with opportunities to get involved in the river cleanup. This is from our annual Duwamish River Festival, which will be happening again this year on August 23rd, coming right up. Finding ways for people to be involved that's really interactive and starts to go deeper. So instead of formal presentation on what's in the cleanup plan, we built a model of it in a giant indoor volleyball court in the sand with a group of Georgetown artists, so that people could actually walk through the river and walk through the cleanup plan and understand the different options and how that was going to impact them and their experience of the river. This was also last year, and as you can see, there's a visual arts exhibit with this as well, but this was perhaps our most successful public meeting ever. Well over 100 people there, and people came away feeling like they finally understood what all these things meant. They finally understood what contaminated sediment remediation was about and what different options there were, and could then meaningfully give EPA feedback on what they wanted to see happen by being able to experience it in a more visceral way through the arts rather than just trying to read and understand something on paper. And then the most recent thing that we're doing is a River for All campaign that's letting folks really express themselves and how they interact with the river. And there's both testimonials and visual testimonials, and this is a group of artists in Georgetown's contribution to the River for All campaign. So I will hand this back over to Sarah to talk about a couple of the next things coming up.
Okay, so we're sort of getting close to our time, so I'm going to run through these last few slides pretty quickly, and then if you guys have questions, we would be happy to talk more. So this is the Living Barge Project. This is something that Nicole and I did in 2006, so quite a few years ago now, but we planted an industrial barge with the native plants of the Duwamish River Basin to sort of make a comment on the coexistence of nature and industry in the Duwamish, and also to sort of get people thinking about its history and its future, and just to sort of let people know that there is a river in the city. And in addition to sort of making this aesthetic statement, we really, both Nicole and I, Nicole's a landscape architect, I'm an urban planner, so we both have ideas about sort of political organizing and public involvement. And so we did want to make this a project that resulted in positive change in the community around it. So basically what we did was we used the barge as sort of an anchor or a leverage point, and sort of got out into the community and partnered with a bunch of community organizations, with the DRCC, and kind of said, well, we're going to be trying to, get some attention on the Duwamish. Now's your opportunity. What do you want to do kind of leverage that. And so basically, people came up with plenty of ideas around the barge. So we did neighborhood walking tours, we did boat tours, we did art walks, music nights, all sorts of kind of family-oriented events. This is the DRCC's boat tour that they did on the opening day of the barge. We were part of the first Duwamish Alive Earth Day cleanup event. We partnered with a local high school class to teach them about environmental art. And this is them at the Duwamish Shipyard. The Duwamish Shipyard was our industrial partner, they were wonderful. They donated the barge and a ton of union labor to put it together. And then at the end of the project, the volunteers planted the plants from the living barge at Cesar Chavez Park at South Park. And so fast forward to 2014, and Nicole and I are just kicking off this really exciting new program, which is going to be large-scale public art performance and all sorts of other activities and events along the river and about the river in summer 2015. So, and once again, this is sort of the expressed goal of the project is that it creates positive change in the community and also raising awareness regionally that, yes, there's a river here. And what we're really trying to push for this project is to be as really as inclusive as we can and engage and reflect as many different cultures and communities and people along the river as we can. And that's really a substantial part of the process, is to kind of create this inclusive process for curating and organizing the art projects, getting past all the different sort of language and cultural barriers that exist, not just between, sort of the I don't know, white project organizers, but sort of the art world barriers, which is its own sort of clique in itself. So. So that's a really, I don't know, we're just kicking off this project, but we do have a Facebook page up, and we should have a website up in the next few days, and we will be posting calls for artists. So if there are people you know who are interested in this sort of stuff, please start spreading the word. Okay. And this is what we've learned. If anybody wants to ask questions, I guess now's the time.
Let's give our thanks to BJ and Sarah for their presentation of the Duwamish. Great stuff. I'm going to hold off on questions now just because I hate to cut off passionate, interesting, exciting projects, and we've got a bunch of them so far, but I want to honor the folks who haven't yet presented yet. So if we have time left at the end or maybe afterwards, you can ask questions about the Duwamish. So our next pair of presenters are Jane Compson and Robin Evans-Agnew. So come on up here. Jane has a PhD in comparative religion from the University of Bristol and has worked as instructor in philosophy and religious studies at the University of Central Florida. And in 2012, she started her current position as assistant professor in arts and sciences at UW-Tacoma, where she teaches in religious studies, philosophy, and ethics. Her current research interests are environmental ethics, the application of Buddhist ethics and practices into contemporary secular context, such as healthcare and education. And Robin Evans-Agnew is also assistant professor at UW-Tacoma in nursing healthcare leadership program, and his research interests are in asthma inequalities, environmental justice, and the intersections of public health and primary care. He has a bachelor's in nursing from Johns Hopkins and did his dissertation research on asthma management disparity policy with African American adolescents and public health policymakers at UW School of Nursing. And as they both told me, both they and our next speaker will sound like they're from exotic places, but they're both from Tacoma, and our next speaker's from Bainbridge Island. So we're not being quite as international as the voices might sound, but welcome to Robin and Jane. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. So I'd like to introduce Robin, who's you've just mentioned. Robin's in nursing, and I'm in interdisciplinary arts and science, but mainly philosophy. It's pure coincidence that we're both Brits. We both started 2 years ago, got chatting and started talking about environmental justice and realized that our fields talked about it a lot, but we had very different conceptions of what it was. Then we ran across a student who was very interested in this topic. He can't be here today, Chris, but I wanted to give a shout out to him. He's been really involved in this project. So as a result of these preliminary conversations, we thought we would try and get a project going and really to involve our students and the community. Tacoma's really committed to, UW-Tacoma is really committed to being an urban serving campus. So it was really important to us to bring this conversation beyond the walls of the Ivory Tower. So I'll give a little brief background to the kind of the spark that got this conversation going. And then we'll talk about the project, and Robin will take over with the results. So basically, the tension that we discovered between our different disciplines can be summarized by an anthropocentric conception of environmental justice, which is one that sees justice framed in terms of human concepts of fairness, or that the remit for what's fair and who's included in that concept of fairness basically stops with humans, or that if there is environmental degradation, it's problematic insofar as it affects humans. So that's a very broad brush picture, but generally it's a human-centered concept of what justice means. On the other side, we have an ecocentric conception of justice that sees the distinction between humans and nature as being as ontologically separate as being just a mistake, that you cannot talk about human health and environmental health as separate, and we need to change our thinking that reifies those distinctions. And as long as we have those that value distinction between humans on one hand and nature on the other, and nature being resources for humans, then that problematic thinking is always going to lead to the same unfortunate results. So it's really hard to put all this in a nutshell, but that was basically the tension. Kevin DeLuca puts it really well here. Oh, thank you. Right, and so what we discovered is that certainly in our awareness of the different disciplines we represented, environmental justice the focus tends to be on humans. And non-humans it's only significant insofar as it affects. Can't multitask. The environmental impact is only significant insofar as it affects humans. Thank you. I've talked about this already. But we became curious about this divide, particularly as it manifested in our own discourses. And we wanted to see how that might be reflected in the general community. And we also wanted to use this as a teaching opportunity for our students. So I will really quickly go through this. I'm sure with this kind of conference you guys are familiar with environmental justice. Some of the kind of heroes that brought this to the public awareness were Rachel Carson, and of course Bullard's work in the early 80s. And that was kind of solidified by the report by the United Church of Christ, which brought particularly to awareness the racial disparities between about exposure to toxicities or environmental degradation. Just in terms of our disciplines, Chris, he is in urban studies, he's not here, but he noted that although urban studies talks a lot about environmental health or, focuses on sustainability, it still tends to be framed in an anthropocentric language, insofar as it provides a good, healthy, livable spaces for humans. Do you want to mention about nursing?
Nursing's the same way, right? We're there for the care of humans and nothing else. So it's a very human-centric way of thinking, and anthropocentric way of thinking about the environment and about environmental health.
Good. And so in philosophy, there's a relatively new discipline that began in the 70s, really, about the same time that Earth Day happened in the States, at least. And it focused on a more ecocentric view of justice and started to challenge these anthropocentric values. And this is sort of what I was getting more and more familiar with, and this is what started the conversation off between Robin and I when we started to say, what do you mean by justice? How does that work? So we decided to come up with this project. We got some funding from what's it called? The Center for Social Leadership and Engagement at UWT. I teach a class called Environmental Ethics. It's a 400-level class, but a lot of the students may have had no exposure to philosophy at all. And so I wanted to give them something kind of hands-on that helps them to see how these issues are important in practice in their daily lives. So what we decided to do was ask students to interview local stakeholders, local people who were involved in somehow or other professionally with issues surrounding environmental organization, environmental health, environmental advocacy. And students were allowed to choose anybody they liked as long as they had a professional interest in those broad areas. They could choose faculty, but they were also encouraged to look beyond the ivory tower as well. They were then asked to make a maximum 15-minute interview on a video interview with these stakeholders. And they were all they all had to ask the same questions so that we could do our comparative analysis. Once we had all these, they were uploaded to YouTube, and ultimately they were uploaded to the Digital Commons, which is goes through the UWT library. It's publicly accessible, and anybody can access these, and it's also searchable. So it's kind of useful. People can look at any kind of particular keyword they're interested in. And the transcripts are also available. So that's now live and up there. And probably you'll talk about that in a minute, right?
Yeah.
I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, there it is. This is the Digital Commons website. And so this is a new thing, but it's an open access thing that's going on in universities all around in terms of being able to provide another format for student work and other work that doesn't necessarily make it into journals or books or other things. It's a way for universities to kind of create this repository, and we thought this was a great advantage to kind of use this new space for exhibiting community engaged work as a resource for community members as well as our UW community as well. So I just wanted to show you briefly an excerpt from one of the videos that we This is one of the videos that was produced as a result of this. We'll watch a couple of minutes of this.
Hi, my name is Hannah Aoyagi. I work for the Washington State Department of Ecology, which is our state's environmental protection agency. But today I'm really here representing my own views and my academic background. My graduate research was in environmental justice, looking at how air pollution affects minority and low-income communities. And I've taught courses in environmental justice at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, and also at the University of Washington Tacoma campus, which is where we are right now. And I'd like to start off by just talking about my personal definition of environmental justice. I view environmental justice as equal access to a clean and healthy environment, plain and simple. I believe that everyone has a right to a clean and healthy environment, regardless of race, income, age, or any other characteristic that can define a population. And right here in Tacoma, we have lots of examples of environmental problems. Some are more visible than others.
All right, so I'm going to pause it there because it's a 15-minute interview, of course. But you can see these are the sorts of text that we were able to get from these interviews. And the interviews were done with not only people in the Tacoma environs, but also within the UW campus as well. So students were kind of given free rein for picking and selecting people to interview. We just didn't want to repeat interviews with the same community members. I'm going to talk a little bit about the results of what we found when we did some content analysis on the interviews, and how to look at sort of what we wanted to look at was to basically understand the concepts of anthropocentrism and ecocentrism, and try to look at how people were talking about environmental justice when they were asked to define it, whether it was more anthropocentric, whether it was ecocentric, and what other sorts of things would emerge from the interviews. So this is a little bit about the demographics of our sample. We had fairly even numbers of males and females, and around 6 people who were university faculty, government agencies, elected officials, a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 people from nonprofits, and a for-profit business. So that was I think that was a business that worked in environmental consulting in the area. Here are our main themes that kind of came up with this. When we broke this out, the way we looked at it, there are themes within ecocentric forms of thinking that people talked about. We found 6 topics within that, and about 8 people that actually talked and mentioned some forms of ecocentrism within the way they were talking about their interviews. Anthropocentrism, you can see that actually 16 people were really predominantly using anthropocentric forms of talk. And the topics, if you look at the topics inside anthropocentrism, there's only three of them, right? Sustainability, economics, and human rights. But if you reflect on what we heard this morning from the panel presentation, it was pretty much those 3 topics, right? These are the 3 dominant topics when we talk about environmental justice and sustainability. These are the stuff we talk about: the economics, sustainability, and human rights. It's encapsulated within the work that we're thinking is important. I think what we realized through this work was that ecocentrism was a thread within some of the ways that people were talking, but it was certainly a less dominant thread than anthropocentric forms of thinking. Here are a couple of the examples of anthropocentric forms of thinking in terms of talking about fair distribution of resources. Someone said, when we act as good stewards of the environment, what we're doing in a sense is making sure that those natural resources will remain in perpetuity for our community. Again, it's a conversation about resources. It's a disassociation from the environment and humans' interest in it. Certainly a dominant theme within environmental justice is this notion that we're going to empower the voiceless, right? We're going to help people have those tools and the confidence to be able to speak up for themselves and their community, and giving them the security that there will not be negative repercussions. You know, a lot of our work inside environmental justice is working with people, human beings. The themes that we saw and the phrases that we saw when people started to use ecocentric forms of thinking was certainly around this idea that we're complex and interrelated with the environment. I think environmental justice does help us recognize the complexity of each situation, where we might need to reconsider the most appropriate kind of plant life is in that area to accommodate both humans and non-humans. So we were looking for those phrases when people started talking about non-humans. Jane had a really good example of this when she said, we need to think about, you know, the rights of a rock, right? A rock has rights in ecocentric forms of thinking. It's a challenging thought, especially when we're beginning to think about, well, what's the role of nursing in the rights of rocks? How does that kind of work with my form of thinking? One of the other sort of dominant things that people talked about, so much so that we broke it out as a separate theme, was this theme around environmental degradation. Especially in Pierce County, we have a wood smoke pollution, major wood smoke pollution problem. So people talked a lot about wood burning stoves, and then we're able to also talk about this notion, again, that what we heard this morning around global warming and the shifting away from burning fossil fuels. So some of those are some dominant discourses within environmental justice. I don't know whether Jane, you wanted to comment a little bit about what you saw as the challenges and some of the opportunities within this. So I'll just give one that I think is it's a great opportunity, which is to do digital commons, to have a more of an open debate within your community around what defines environmental justice and what needs to be done. Another opportunity within that is to really begin to understand and recognize and hold up ecocentric forms of thinking. For me, in terms of teaching nursing, I'm taking what I found out back in this to really re-engineer the way I think about teaching environmental nursing. Because it's not, nursing does not want to be necessarily limited to just anthropocentric forms of thinking, that we understand that these new ideas around ecocentrism can really help benefit the world and nature and non-human things as well. So that's the challenge for me, is to try and figure out how to incorporate that in my pedagogy.
Okay, well, so we're almost done. So one of the good things, I'll just say one challenge, one opportunity and one challenge. One of the great things for me is teaching philosophy was that I'm always teaching my students that we all have a worldview and we all have implicit values that we may or may not acknowledge. This was a great way for students to see not only their own values but other people's too. A challenge on the other side of that, though, was that I feel like we now need another course to talk about what do we do about that. So, the unanswered questions that come up, and that's part of philosophy, but I wish we had more time to play with that. So, yeah, there's plenty more work to be done. But it was fun. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks to Jane and Robin. So our final presenter, coming from a different angle today, is Dr. Wolfram Pinker, who has 20 years of global business and an entrepreneurial experience in the field of environmental certification. Prior to running his current certification business, he has worked for 2 larger international certification organizations in leadership roles with responsibility for the expansion of their certification departments across 4 continents. His doctoral thesis focused on the role of employees within manufacturing plants as part of the implementation of environmental management systems, analyzing the relevance of human beings and their interaction with products, equipment, processes, and procedures within the field of human factors. So welcome, Dr. Wolfram Pinker.
All right. Good afternoon. Great. So I will talk about environmental innovation in Europe and opportunities. And I'm planning to talk briefly about regulations in Europe. I know it can be boring, but it's actually quite interesting looking for opportunities to actually implement measures to address challenges in terms of renewable energy, mobility, waste management, water protection, emission control, and consumer behavior. Now, let me start with one comment. Regulations in Europe are very complex, as probably everywhere in the world, but the biggest challenge we really have is that environmental regulations are covered by various laws and regulations, which makes it very, very difficult. Right? Let me give you a couple of examples. Now, when you want to build a new home, you need to, and that's actually a requirement from the Energy Savings Act from 2009, you need to either use solar energy or biomass, or if you don't want to, if you can, at least you need to surpass the insulation standards, the current insulation standards, by a minimum of 15%, and even higher in a couple of years. Now, if you want to renovate an apartment building, or if you acquire a new single or double occupancy home, you actually pretty much have to remove older boilers, which are older than from 1978. Now, interesting is also there's a so-called energy pass. Now, there's really somebody coming into your home if you are renting, for instance, checking the apartment for energy aspects. So you get a pass from A to H, which talks about how thick your walls are, what the energy factor is, etc. Now, the problem with that is that you definitely have, when you have these limits, it can suppress innovation because obviously industry always goes to the maximum they are required to do. Minimum. Now, another example is with regulations. Starting actually next month, vacuum cleaners cannot exceed 1600 watts. So that's all these regulations now coming from the European Union. Now, quite more interesting is talking about as mentioned this morning by Bill in the video conference, what's actually done in order to be a leader in renewable energy in Germany. And it was pretty much pushed by the conservative Chancellor Angela Merkel, who said short after Fukushima, well, we just have to phase out nuclear energy. And that will happen in 2022. And with that, obviously renewable energy has to play a big factor, since in Germany there's just not so much other alternative besides coal. And we all know with the CO2 challenges we have, coal is not the best way to do it. Now the problem is with the phase out, Germany, one of the leading countries in nuclear power research, pretty much will probably reduce their efforts, although there are new technologies like dual fluid reactors working or replacing uranium by chlorides and sodium chlorides, etc., with way, way higher energy output with many less years in storing and also lower costs. And you may know there's a lot of research going on with nuclear fusion versus the traditional nuclear fission. Now, the goal is actually by 2025 to have renewable energy play a role of 40 to 45%. And so renewable energy, we're talking about solar, wind, water, and biogas. Now the challenges we have is that there needs to be an infrastructure, because most wind energy, for instance, is generated in northern Germany. It needs to go somewhere to southern Germany, so a lot of investments have to be made. The other thing is probably similar here in the United States when you want to have a railway system going through states. Some of the states say, no, we don't want it. And that's very similar in Germany, where you have some states which simply say, no, we just don't want these power lines, and no, we don't want to invest the money. And there's a huge surcharge I will show on the next slide upfront to pay for the infrastructure. And the other challenge, there have been mistakes made over the last couple of years there was another government with the Green Party and the center left. So they promised and they guaranteed, I think, more than 20 cents per kilowatt hour to those who produce renewable energy. It was a great idea, and it was really good intentions. However, now it has to be paid for, and there's actually overall, per year now, that $23 billion have to be paid by households, where everybody pays around, last year in 2014, actually 6.24 euro cents per kilowatt hour. I think here in this area, you pay only 12 US cents. So you just have to imagine, so what people have to pay just in order to pay for the move towards renewable energy. Another thing which just had been decided a couple of days ago, fracking now has been banned with some few examples. Now, but on the positive side, there's a lot going on in Europe. For instance, in Spain, you may have heard about there's one company in Alicante, Spain, which produces bio-crude oil actually from algae with the help of algae with photosynthesis, etc. Now, there's also biodiesel produced similar to here to the United States, mostly or predominantly by a company in Finland with the help of microbes from wood chips, sawdust, and straw. And there's even now gasoline manufactured. There's some research going on at the University of Karlsruhe, but also even in Switzerland, they already produce gasoline from straw, which is straw as a waste product. That's pretty good. Now, there again, back to regulations. So when you go shopping for light bulbs in Europe, you pretty much won't find any old-fashioned light bulbs anymore. They are just mostly LEDs, etc. Simply because there are requirements to the manufacturers to have a very high lumen light output related to the use of energy. There are also other opportunities, very intelligent solutions. So energy providers produce or actually deliver energy at certain prices. They vary from hour to hour during the day. Obviously, they want people to use their energy during night hours when it's easier for them to generate outside the peak hours. So there are even apps you can get from them which tell you exactly why it's cheap. And when you see most washing machines and dryers, etc., they have timers, so you can really let them run during night. Another example would be when you have these huge refrigeration warehouses. They pretty much, during these cheap energy hours, they just increase the temperatures, and then during times where it's very expensive, let's say after 4 p.m., 5 p.m., they reduce and still have enough cold air inside from the night hours. Now, a couple of other examples are Audi car manufacturer. They are actually using the CO2 from biogas and are able to produce hydrogen from this. And I will later on talk about this a little bit more. Linde, a big gas manufacturer, they actually are using the byproduct from biodiesel production, glycerin, and produce hydrogen from that. There's even, I read now, there's plexiglass or plastic manufactured with the help of CO2 with alcohol and a metal called ruthenium. And that's just really fantastic. So in future, we will have more and more actually products which are produced from input which we, of course, don't want to have and want to reduce. And then, of course, you know, there's a laser here. You know, this formula, when it's pretty much with hydrogen and CO2, you can produce methane. Now, the big question now, of course, is what do we do with the methane manufactured at certain times when electricity can be manufactured with windmills, which obviously don't run all the time, often not at night. And so how do you actually, where do you put the methane with all the surplus of wind energy? There are 33,000 kilometers, around 23,000 miles of gas pipelines going through Germany. And you can pretty much mix the natural gas with the methane without any problem. So there are definitely intelligent ways to address these challenges, because a lot of people who still have concerns about renewable energy and all the costs and all the challenges, there are definitely ways around it there. It's just a question of research and applying knowledge. Another example is ETH Zurich, one of the leading technical universities in Europe. They are developing a mat which actually is on roofs and absorbs water during rain, and then it evaporates or perspires during sun hours, with that cooling buildings down. I mean, just think about Arizona or Nevada, etc. That would be just perfect for them, at least to get the water during winter time, I guess. There are also nowadays solar panels. Another criticism with renewable energy is that photovoltaic looks so ugly, etc. No, there are actually ways with very thin panels which can be put on buildings. They can be colored. They could even be used for advertisement, etc. And there are even textiles I read last week that can be rolled and integrated, or photovoltaic cells can be integrated into textiles. Now, switching over to water, hydro energy, there are definitely great opportunities, mostly in northern Europe, in Scandinavia. I saw pictures of hydro power plants